Welcome to the podcast series of the CoCreativeSex Summit Podcast Series. I'm very excited today to be receiving a special guest. Her name is Shanai'a Ray. And I had the honor of meeting her because I was had my booth beside her actually at the Sacred Sexual Music Festival. And she came up and looked at my continuum that I'd put up there. She's like, sexual vampirism, she said. I think I know something about that. She's like, I had an experience that was intense in that way. And so we started talking, and it turned out to be a very profound story of devastation. And I know that Kelsea, Kelsea too, right?
Kelsea, yeah. It's confusing.
Shanaia has been on this long journey of just recovering her power back and healing. And she was in the middle of it when I met her. She was in that healing journey and has been in a very vibrant place since, I don't know exactly when, but you're sort of coming out of that space of what that's meant. You're in love with someone that's amazing. And so I asked her if she'd be willing to share her story, because I know how many stories we see that go into the news about an authority figure that takes advantage of their position of power, and eventually the devastation that comes from that. And so Shanaia is going to sort of share her story, just give us a sense of what were the different grooming techniques and what she learned from it, and just the power that she's gained from actually healing from that story. So I'm really excited to have her here on the show. And this is in the context of the CoCreativeSex Summit Podcast Series is also, we're creating momentum and getting all these real conversations out about sex and all the healing that needs to happen in the world of sexuality. And we're creating an event on the 14th, 15th, and 16th of February, bringing in amazing people that are doing the work to help us heal sexuality in the world and heal our lives from anything that doesn't feel in alignment, basically, and to be able to embody our sexuality in a way that's really nourishing and powerful, and that we fully feel whole as human beings. So I'm excited to just also, for me, it's always important to go into the shadow side, look at some of the things that are more difficult to talk about, and look at the healing journey, because there's so much to learn in that process. So welcome, Shanaia.
Thank you, Julie. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. What a lovely introduction.
And also, I didn't mention that she's also doing amazing things for the community of healing that's called womb cleansing events. So she'll tell us all about the different things she's taking on to be a contribution to society too. So Shanaia, could you just tell me a little bit more if there's something I missed about who you are that you'd like to share before we go into your story?
I mean, yeah, we don't know each other too well, but meeting you at the festival was really sweet, and our connection was lovely. And I had a lot of my work in the past was in, the sexual community as a practicing sexual empowerment coach. And so my past kind of guided me further along my experience to heal from sexual abuse, and then go into an experience where I had to heal from sexual and spiritual abuse. And so this was kind of like the next level of my awakening in that sort of dimension of work. And so now I've kind of turned my work around, not so much focusing on the sexual empowerment, because I just didn't resonate with me in that way anymore. I feel like I've gone down a different journey with womb wisdom and womb weaving and empowerment of, the feminine embodied in her womb space. And that's what kind of led me into this, the traumatic experience that I had as well, was my desire to learn about the womb. And I kind of came towards a group that I found online that was offering really deep tantric practices, and I just got hooked in right away. And I was traveling to Hawaii to do the retreats, and I ended up separating from my partner in the middle of it. that was actually part of the grooming technique, was to slowly separate people in the group from their families, from their loved ones. It was kind of a cult. In the end, I realized that a lot of the cult tactics I checked off all the boxes. And in that process,
could you define for the people listening to what was the name of the cult?
it was called womb wisdom.
Okay.
Yes, it was all
wow. It's like a word that can seem like so, in a like sort of not scary at all, and sort of just becoming in touch with your feminine. And here it is actually something behind that was very devastating for you.
Exactly. And it was, it was mostly women that were teaching the work, but the main authority figure and teacher of this work was a man. And he was the one that was claiming to be teaching womb wisdom. And so there was some, even that in itself should have been a red flag for me, but it was always woman teaching me. So that wasn't really put into much thought, or I didn't think that it was a big deal at the time, because I was more so interacting with all the women teachers. And so I still get shaken up about sharing. So if I stumble around here, please bear with me. But so once I got in contact with the leader of this group, he started to come on to me. And there was this night where he placed his hand on my leg, and it was almost like this rush of energy came into my body. And at that moment, I know that something happened. There was some sort of energetic transference, or it almost felt like a third party entity or a spirit had come into my body. And he weaved this story of how we were past lovers, and how he was here
life, right?
in past life. And he was here to guide me and open my womb and show me what true womb healing was. And in many ways, there was a factor of that through this process. I remember speaking to someone, and they had said, this wasn't meant to happen. He was tempted, and he was actually supposed to help you, but his wounds and his own shadows basically took over him, and he began to manipulate me into being with him sexually. And
so before we go down there, is there something in your previous past, like was there something else that like some transgression of boundaries that you've had in the past that made you more vulnerable to this, or is it just your first experience of someone not respecting your boundaries?
I did actually have a certain experience. So it was almost like, as I was in the world of Tantra, I was in Hawaii again I spent a lot of time in Hawaii, but I was there for one of the ISTA trainings, and a couple of the leaders there were really sort of subtly and also very obviously hinting towards sexual desires and attractions towards me. And my first experience of like, oh, this doesn't feel good, was in that training. And I actually left that experience because I just couldn't handle that energy coming towards me. But in this case, I looked up to this man so much because I had already been in this group for about 1.5 years and had been seeing the shifts that I was going through. And
were you coming from, like, I was just curious, like what brought you to womb wisdom? Was it something that was like you were like trying to heal something, or what was the thing that brought you there?
So in my work, I was guiding women to connect with their wombs.
Okay, right.
It was like my womb was already speaking to me and guiding me. And so I just looked online and was like, womb wisdom, I want to know more. And
Right.
I found that group. And I
So
think
that was from your like professional like interest. You're like, oh, I'm going to be more service to other women because they need this. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. So now going through that experience, I've been able to take what I've learned, but now rewrite it or recreate it in a way that's grounded in what I've learned and kind of purified it now in my own way. And so I offer similar work because my journey has paved that way, but it's not connected to any of that darker energy that was woven into that
Right.
experience. Yeah.
Okay. So there was that ISTA experience. You're like, this doesn't feel good.
Mm.
You were doing your womb wisdom, but you had a lot of women that were teaching you. And it was just after like a year and a half that you meet this man, and he makes this advance on you, puts his hand on you, and there's this weird energy that comes through.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starts having this whole story around, hey, we've been past lovers, it's really important that we be together. And he kind of creates this narrative that you are part of with him.
Exactly. And I'm going to help you heal. And your soul's going to evolve so much. I'm going to open your womb. And I think a lot of these tantric teachers or authority figures, that's how they'll hook, their next target individual into their experiences by, teasing them with that, oh, I'll show you the way. Oh, we'll open you up. I'll give you all the tools that you need to evolve. Because especially when we're on the spiritual path, we're hungry for that evolution. At least for myself, I desired to become closer to myself, to become closer to God and source. And, that inspired me. So it felt like I was so special. Like it really fueled that ego within me that was like, wow, I'm the chosen one. It's
Yeah.
like
You feel like you have
out of all the people.
Yeah, you have this contribution to make, and then they're like even telling you, yeah, you're so unique and important and special, and your contribution is going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So
it
if
brought
anyone
you in.
if anyone tells you that you're special and that they're gonna show you the way, like that's a huge red flag on
Right,
the path. Yeah.
right. So then you kind of so you started like listening to this narrative, and you're like, hey, this makes me feel special and important, and how did it continue going down this path?
Yeah, so that was kind of the hook. There was also a hook of creating guilt and shame. So in this particular scenario, he also played a story where I had betrayed him in this past life. And through that, my emotions were hooked. And so a lot of what I find with psychic vampirism and the relationships that are formed is that there's these extreme emotional highs and lows, this kind of push and pull, and they'll build you up and love bomb you, and then they'll cut you down and gaslight you and blame you and wrong you and belittle you. And it creates this emotional wave of connection that begins to almost siphon. Well, for me, it siphoned my life force. It
Mm,
siphoned my essence. It was like who I was, my mental capacity, my physical and emotional capacity all became reduced
okay.
to like I was broken down. And so over time, it was this constant push and pull, like I love you, I hate you. And this battle field in a way just took over. But
Mm,
my mind wanted to leave. My mind knew that something wasn't right, that this is not normal. But it was like my solar plexus and my emotions wouldn't keep me from walking away. I was so emotionally invested.
mm,
And that's, I think, what the psychic vampirism, when there's those extreme chords, they
mhm.
can be so hard to sever because those wounds or those blind spots that are setting you up into these dynamics and these relationships, you can't see them. So it really takes that deeper look within oneself to heal those cords that are connecting you with such a dark, almost parasitic essence, right?
When you say sort of the psychic vampirism, describe it a little bit for us.
Yeah, so, my experience with it, and a lot of what I teach is just experiential. And I know there's almost like a psychopathology with psychic vampirism, and you can look and study it across the board. And it's someone that is so empty. I often find it's like narcissistic narcissists or people with personality disorder. There is some psychopathology there, or just people in general that, don't really have that connection to source, and they don't have um or they're just they don't have a strong grounded essence in who they are, and so they're constantly seeking that outside of themselves. They're seeking, connections that will fill them up, but because their hole in their auric field or their essence is so big, they start to take the light of the people around them. And generally that happens through the emotions. And so in this case, that's what happened. It was like he was reflecting, like when I saw his positive and I saw his love and his beautiful nature, it was like he was sucking that energy from me and showing me who I was outside of myself. Yet that was draining me and making him seem like this amazing person. But then when he couldn't handle his own distortions or his own wounds, and he would basically belittle me or gaslight me and blame me for his own projections and things that were happening in his reality, and all of that came crashing down, and I could no longer feel that. It was like my essence or energy was drained, and he was left as this all powerful sorcerer in a way, with all this power. But I think the experience that I went through is like on one of the most extremes, because he was a very highly evolved spiritual man, and he had a lot of psychic powers. And so this can happen on many levels. Every day we're kind of emotionally, there can be everyday psychic vampirism where emotionally we're feeding off of each other, and this can be very subtle. But when we go out, let's say to the mall, and we have that experience of coming home and we're just so drained, it's because people are feeding on our energy, whether we know it or not. And that I think is like the smallest example, or like the least effective or abusive.
Right.
Then you kind of carry on the scale to these extreme, intense levels of psychic vampirism. And at that point, like in my experience, it felt like there was a third entity that was connected in our relationship. And there was a night where I could literally feel this dark force on top of me that was like taking my energy. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is that? And over time, I began to understand that that most likely was part of this psychic vampire that was feeding on my life force. Does that make sense?
Was he present too, or was it like you just in that you're alone and felt that force?
Yeah, it was just in my own space, but it was like I could feel him watching me. That's the thing. I could constantly feel psychically, energetically, that he was always with me, watching me. He could hear my thoughts. I never felt that I was alone in my own space. Like he was always there. And I think with that level of connection, I think that's actually a normal thing that can happen, is this constantly feeling like you're being watched.
Right.
Because there is this sort of third party entity or vampire, I think, that's connecting us together,
Right.
psychically, emotionally. Yeah, it's bizarre, really.
Yeah. So when you say he was a very highly spiritual and evolved human being, what does that mean exactly? Because he's obviously also taken advantage of it. So you sort of think, well, how can he be emotionally spiritually
Right.
evolved if he's doing this? But he had faculties. So describe what those faculties were.
Yeah, good question, because he was spiritually evolved in the sense that he had amazing consciousness, yet he wasn't embodied, and he wasn't grounded and rooted in his teaching. So at the end of the day, how spiritually evolved was he? Consciousness and
Like
embodied.
in the story and the ideas, but
Exactly.
that he wasn't able to bring it into reality. He
Exactly. And
had
so,
access to like acute, very precise ideas,
Mhm.
and it was very impressive. But
Exactly.
then, but at the same time, there's other things you're talking about, like that faculty to watch you, or faculty, like these kind of psychic abilities. What were those abilities that he had?
Yeah, so that the way that I see it is almost like he had this sort of team, like um I want to almost say like the organization, because it was all this work was around, the Christ lineage, and we were constantly praying to these higher entities. But I think that those higher beings were false in a way, like almost like dark energies that weren't the true light that we were connecting with. Because I don't think a man of that caliber could actually have these light beings supporting him like he said he was.
Right.
But part of the things that he would do, he would come into our dream time as woman. So he would be able to come into our dream time and kind of mess around with us sexually, energetically. Um, he, like I said, I think like in the way that I felt he was watching me, I really do believe like he would be tracking me, he would be watching me. He would know what I was thinking when I was in a different room and
Right.
be able to say, what are you thinking about? Why are you thinking about this? And it would just blow me away because I was like, wow,
That's
you
exactly what
know.
I was thinking.
Exactly. So he, I think, had been given all of these powers through his black magic that he was wielding. It was like he was a sorcerer in a way.
Hmm.
And he would tap into women. So this is how he used the woman, because he would be able to connect with our wounds as we would share our stories or our experiences as the woman in the work. And he would be able to almost extrapolate and take our essence from us
Hmm.
and write it in a way that was more advanced, or like he could elaborate on it, that and it so he was literally taking the power and the essence of these women's wombs and their essence, and writing about it and creating this work as he went. And so it was almost like he was saying that he was the you know receiver of this work, but I think he was taking it and almost stealing the codes from the woman and then making it his own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like he had access to this kind of field of knowledge through
Mm.
the women. The women were like conduit for it, and
Exactly.
then kind of appropriating it as his wisdom, that he was getting it directly.
Yeah.
So it'd be very confusing for all the women there, because it's like, wow, this is so powerful knowledge, and it feels so aligned, and yet it's also then used in a way to manipulate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of my work is, bringing forth that wisdom, but in a way that's not indoctrinated. We're all sitting as equals. There's no authority figure. We're
Right.
all, showing up and sharing our wisdom and tapping into what's there, because the womb is such a powerful field. It's such a powerful void. And there's so much information, you know, that is stored within us, and we can tap into that. And as women, when we gather, there's so much healing that comes from that. Yet it's so important that we protect that and keep
Right.
that safe. The
Right.
safety of our womb is so important. And he
Hmm.
basically was coming in and hijacking the power of our wombs.
Right.
Really, really sick.
Yeah.
Devastating. Yeah.
Well, you're just giving me access as we speak to, if our wombs have, and even like, our sexes have all this knowledge, that there is something really sacred about who you're letting come in, and who's accessing your essence, basically.
Yeah, it's huge
Yeah.
because there is a energetic transference. We're taking on each other's consciousness and weaving that into our genetics. Our DNA is impacted, yet there can be tools that we can use to clear out our wombs of those forces, and clear out our energetic space and cut those cords. And
Yeah.
so even if we do, choose to be with someone, or unconsciously choose to be with someone that is toxic or unhealthy, we can take our power back, which is the
Right.
the best part. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
I'm just also just remembering, like, now my whole interview process as I was writing my book is that these actually stories of people being able to access um, just like women's sexual energy through dream or through meditation. There's been a few stories like that that have come in my awareness, where it was, and often it was some form of, like, spiritual guru or teacher, and it would that person would come in and actually take advantage of something that was going on. And I'm just curious if you know anything more about that. Like, what kind of what are they, yeah, we talked a little bit about what they're trying to access, but how do they do that? How do they come into that space? What have you discovered?
Um, I think there's what's coming up with this answer is there's our blind spots, right? And so we have holes in our essence. And I think these people, they obviously have their own wounds, they have their own holes or things that they're working on. And I think there's an energetic match. So if we are resonating at a similar frequency, like there was something within myself that contracted or agreed to going through that experience.
Right.
And in that, I gave him my power. I gave him privilege to enter me and to essentially take from me. That was something I agreed to.
Yeah.
But it was my wounds, it was my blind spots, it was my holes within me, my, lack of self esteem, my lack of empowerment, all of those things that basically led to that experience.
So
And
when
so,
so go for it if you haven't finished.
yeah, I was just going to say, so I think it's, that's a big aspect of the allowing process, because I don't exactly know like the modus operandi of how they take that essence, but you can feel it like energetically. I was drained. Like my auric field, my essence, my life force was shattered. It was like I was barely hanging on a thread. Like it's almost like he was sucking me dry. Like it
Mhm.
took a lot of time to come back to life. And
Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
still experiencing moments where I get hit with almost a psychic attack or a re-trigger, and I'm having to process through that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the wounds and those holes in our essence are what create that connection. It's almost that's where the cords tie in together.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That totally makes sense. So there's a, like, let's say for you, those holes would be like, let's say there was a something damaged on your self-esteem and your capacity to trust yourself, for instance.
Hmm.
Was there
Exactly.
anything else you discovered around, like, where those kind of holes were for you and where they came from?
Yeah, so there was a lot of from childhood, unraveling this process after I kind of stepped out of the veil and could start to see things clearly, because it was literally like I was in a trance, and it was like this love obsession, love spell, like almost zombie like. So coming out of that, I was able to look at my history and look at my mother, look at my father, their characteristics, what felt like home to me growing up. And I
Mm,
could start to see how there was certain energetic resonances with this man. And it was kind of mind blowing, because it was like, oh my gosh, there's my mom in these actions.
mm,
That's the Jekyll and Hyde that I grew up with. Or,
mm.
I started to piece almost my family system together, because
Right.
at that point it was like my whole reality had been shattered.
Yeah.
And so I could start to see how everything in my life had led me up to that point for all of that healing. And
Yeah.
that was like the major breakthrough moment. I got to see my wounds from childhood and my deep desperation for love. I just wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted, appreciated. I was
Mhm.
always seeking for that outside of myself in a way.
Right.
So that's how I was able to kind of get ensnared into that because, oh, you see me, you love me,
Right.
you're this powerful man, like, wow, you know? And that also kind of played on my dark feminine, that desire for power, that desire, to become something bigger or to
Hmm.
be seen as someone on a pedestal in that sense with
Like being
power.
the woman that's loved by the head of the organization.
Exactly. Yeah. So it played on that wound a little bit and those energies. And um, yeah, there was many different things that I had to look at deeply, but I think the deepest one was that self-love, how much I was lacking in my ability to truly love. In your write-up you mentioned that I fell in love with this guru, and I kind of laughed because I'm like, that was so not love. Like in that moment I felt like I was falling in love, but no, that was so not love. That was not true love.
What was it?
That was distortion and manipulation and sexual coercion and a lack of boundaries. And yeah, it was awful, but such a gift in that, because through that experience and almost that dark night, I was able to really see myself in the end and
So
heal. And
So what was that moment actually where you're like it just like because you were depleted, you were completely hanging on a string.
Mhm.
Um, like what allowed you to break free? Like the situation that allowed you to finally wake up to what you were in?
Mhm. It was a process of slowly, like there was a lot of push and pull. So I kind of woke up and then I kind of let him back in, and he was able to play me, manipulate me. He apologized to me, and then I went back. And so there was some time, but then finally I had I had a moment where I started piecing these things together. I started focusing on studying psychic vampirism.
Even while being with him.
Yeah, I had just separated him. Like there was a major meltdown, and he told me that I was the one that was being a vampire to him. Like he called me out. There's this um, term, the love bite. So I had read this article from Bernard Gunther, and he read it too. And he basically told me that I was the reason why, and this is me, it's all my fault. And being the woman that I am, I'm very open to receiving, feedback, and I want to grow. And so I started looking into it and was like, oh, if this is within me, I need to heal this.
What's the love bite?
The love bite, I think, is another term. There's a couple colleagues and people in the paranormal anomalous trauma community that speak to the love bite. And essentially, it's about psychic vampirism, spiritual warfare. It's
Hmm.
a term that has kind of been umbrellaed under this topic,
Mm-hmm.
or this topic's umbrellaed under the love bite phenomena. Um, there's also the dark side of Cupid, and Eve Lorgan was kind of the woman that was the way shower for me to unravel all of that interference. And energetically, they're kind of more on like the alien abduction phenomena. So you kind of have to sift through it and see what resonates, what doesn't. And at that time, across the board, check, 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 oh my gosh, this is what I went through. So it was really sobering for me to
Like
have
what were
people,
you checking as the boxes? What were you?
my experiences, like, oh, that push pull experience, that emotional manipulation, all these red flags. It was like, wow, I experienced that. So having someone that had been through it and someone that could spell it out for me, that's what really helped me wake up, because I could see that it was pathological
Right.
and that I had basically been a target to this and a victim to this in a way.
Sort of allowed you to paint that whole picture. Oh, like all the symptoms I'm feeling, it's not just me. It's actually part of this thing that's going on.
Yeah. So I was able to come outside of my experience in that way. And Yeah, so I'm very grateful for the people that have gone through experiences that have shared their stories, because it's given me a reference point to fall back on, and it's helped me not feel so crazy,
Yeah.
because it was such a devastating and such an impactful and intense experience that it felt like no one could understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, mhm.
What was part of the devastation? Like, how did that show up?
I think the biggest part was the amount of loss that I experienced. Getting kind of roped into a cult unknowingly. Um, the devastation of having to admit to that, like, wow, I really got duped.
Mm,
The devastation of having to find new language, find like the mind control that was woven into my life and many of the other women in that organization. We had to filter through all of that and come back to the truth in
mm,
this grounded reality. A lot of the devastation was connecting with other women that had gone through similar experiences. I shared my story, and women from 10 years ago, started coming forward with their experiences. And so that was really devastating to just see how much and how long this abuse had been going on for
with this same person.
with the same person. Yeah. So coming back into grounded reality and finding my bearings again, because I was separated from my friends, from my family. I was really, almost isolated from the grounded world that we live in.
Wow. And
Mhm.
so, did you ever confront him on this?
I did at a time, and I'm not too sure if he received um, my email. I shared my story. He actually rebutted it on his Facebook and never took accountability for any of it. And so, he's on his journey, and yeah, it boggles my mind that people that were following him were on his side.
Mm,
Even with all the stories that were coming out, he was still able, through his charisma and his personality, manipulate people to believe that the thing
mm,
that he was doing wasn't true,
right.
and that it was all the woman's fault, that he had no part in it.
Hmm. So, just out of curiosity, so is he just like still operating this way in the world?
He's still in the world. Yeah, he's still out there. I don't know if Womb Wisdom is still um, together. It seems like the team of women have separated. The website's down. It could be under something, but um, yeah, I'll speak his name just for people. His name's Padma Ayon Prakasha. He's written books with Anaya Sophia on womb wisdom, and he does a lot of music stuff. And I'm not too sure where he's at now, but he's written, multiple books and is still doing his thing out in the world. So
Hmm.
yeah, he's definitely a predator. So I would be careful around his books. There's a lot of black magic sorcery woven into all of his work. So until he's really humble and can come clean with this, I don't really see anything good coming out of
Hmm.
connecting with that man at all.
Hmm. Well, it's just simply put, it's really out of integrity.
Yeah, yeah. And I still get attacked in my dreams. I'm still warding off psychic attacks, but my confidence and almost like my ability to come out of this dense world of psychic vampirism and really raise my frequency, like once you're vibrating at that higher level, these forces can't get to you. So that's why it's so important to heal those wounds, heal those holes, seal our auras, come into wholeness and integrate all of those blind spots that will
Mm,
guide us into these relationships, so that we can really do that work to be whole and not affected by these lower astral entities or whatever it may be that lives in those demonic realms.
that's such a good point. Like the whole importance of, like, if we look at someone's auric field and there's all these like holes, there's this healing process that needs to happen. So, what did you do to close those up?
I did a lot of mirror work. I looked at myself really deeply in the mirror and, said, I love you multiple
Mm,
times a day. That was my practice for a long time, and I highly recommend it. I had to look at my shadows. I journeyed deep into my past timelines to understand how I had contracted with this energy, what I had done in my past. I had to come to terms with my shadow and how my dark feminine really was getting off in some way by being with him.
mm,
Um, so healing those wounds, looking at again my childhood issues and healing my inner child, holding and being present with my little girl that is inside me, and being present with her was huge because after this I was so open. My inner child wounds were all re-triggered and brought up to the surface.
mhm,
So a lot of that was just being with the emotion, being with the feeling, and allowing myself the space to truly heal and break down and break through.
mm, mm,
A lot of ancestor work as well, looking at my matriarchal line. And so once I went through this journey, I was able to have my connection to my womb and, follow back and do the work in my internal landscapes within my lineage and understand the different themes and the ways that my matriarch line were giving their power away to men, you know, and dissolving those by just the loving power of presence. And so a lot of it was, yeah, internal work, looking at my shadows and
mm.
also just healing my childhood.
So what has this made you today? Like I'm just seeing this really grounded, very clear, very powerful, and just very astute human being in front of me. So I'm just curious, like what do you see this is all giving you, all this work that you've done?
Thank you for that reflection. I definitely see a stronger woman than I ever was, going through the spiritual warfare that I had to go through. It was a major awakening. I got to see some of the forces that move through the communities that people are blind to, and it brought this level of discernment now around the people I spend time with, around um, the connection of energy and how it's exchanged. And it really just, after all of that, it fueled this desire to serve and to support and to empower other women as well. And essentially just feeling more whole and more connected to who I am. It, yeah, inspires to just support others to go through the same thing. And so in that sense, it's brought me to a place where I can then give back, and that always feels good. And
Mm,
my journey's still unraveling. I'm still learning a lot every day. I'm still, going through some healing process around it. There's a lot of unprocessed grief that still comes up. You
like
know,
what do you see what would be the grief? Where does that come from? What kind of grief?
I think it's the grief around believing that that was love. You know,
Mm,
that because the love spell was so intense and it was like a love obsession, it was like the highs were the highest highs I've ever experienced in my life. Yet the lows were so devastating, and it wasn't sustainable
yeah.
in any way. But the high highs, like having to let those go, and just realize that was not love. That was
There's a
something
distortion
else.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's a lot of grief around that experience of love, or just the experience of the devastation, grieving the loss of everything that I had to go through.
Yeah.
And
Time and the self-esteem and
mm,
where you are in your life, like
yeah,
all
yeah.
that life force that you were like putting into this when it could have been something else, all that.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. But now it's like, as I was completely, shattered, I've been able to rebuild myself with so much more strength.
Mm.
My connection to source and God and my spirit and who I truly am is so much more than it ever was. And so I thank this man for what he did, because it's brought me here. And I hold gratitude in my heart for all the hardships. And, I take responsibility for my piece in this. And I think this is really important as women, that we don't blame the men, for what they've done to us, but we see our part in it and take
It's a
responsibility.
dynamic playing out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because so often we'll seek revenge, or, it'll come out in an unhealthy, negative way,
Which
instead
ends
of.
up being still disempowering in the end.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So instead of turning within and looking how we created that in our reality, we want to just, seek revenge or get mad or shame the other or blame the other, when really it's the inner work that is the way through.
Well, that's what, I've been interviewing so many people on these different healing journeys from all kinds of different reasons. And ultimately, there is that moment when you have to fully forgive and fully take responsibility for
Mhm.
being part of the dynamic.
Mm.
And that's only when the actual like other level can kick in.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's awesome that you're seeing that, and that's what you've concluded yourself. It allows you to be in that really amazing place of power and not continue the cycle of disempowering for other people. I had this really interesting interview with a woman that had been abused by her father for so many years, and she was just saying that basically, like, when we start blaming, we're never free from that. And so when we really see that the perpetrators and the victims are both victims in the end, like they both have experienced some form of wounding that's put them in that survival mechanism. it's
Mhm.
it's it's you just see it as like, oh, these are like wounded human beings. It's not, it's just part of the same thing. And then it just like allows for, okay, well, where can I contribute with healing here? you
Mhm.
know Someone who abuses their child, for instance, like they've had their own wounding. So if we just make them wrong, it doesn't really advance the situation, right?
Exactly, exactly. We really need to get to the root of the issue here. And I think, in the world of psychology, they don't really do that. They'll say, here, take some pills, or, just throw them in jail. But, you know, until you get to the root of the issue, these patterns and these psychological, um, almost psychopathologies, they're just going to continue
Hmm.
on and on through our family lineages. And so looking at our family systems, understanding our dynamics, and doing the work to nix those in the butt, that's the key.
So what I see is like you fully took responsibility for yourself in terms of this situation, so that you can really own your healing process and allow yourself to get to that place. How is it knowing that he's still in the world, though, potentially still, in that sort of dimmed consciousness around what he's up to and around self-awareness about himself?
Hmm.
How do you cope with that? Or what's your reflections on that?
Yeah. For a while, I would cry for him and the pain that he is carrying. And that's part of the grief too, is like
Mm,
connecting to that wounded boy within him. But that soul spark is so small compared to the psychopath almost that he is, so
mm,
um there's this desire to want to feel sad and feel sorry for him. And yet my emotional maturity has now guided me away from that, because
mhm,
I don't want to give any sort of emotional energy to him, because in that sense I'm feeding him more. And I
mhm,
think that's important for these women. It's like who we give our emotions to,
mhm.
who we share that space with, that's a very intimate space. And so being mindful of how we give our energy in that way is important.
That's a really important piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I feel quite neutral,
Mm,
honestly. Like, obviously, it makes me disgusted that he hasn't come forward. It
mm,
makes me really mad. Um, like, I'd love to do things that hurt him in some ways. Sometimes I still have those thoughts of like, maybe I should send him a pile of shit for Christmas or, you know. But those are just thoughts. I don't really feed them too much.
yeah.
They're just small, I don't feel that I could really bring myself to carry my life at that level.
Yeah.
It just feels, yeah, just I don't know. He's out there doing his thing, and I just have to pray that, if people are connecting with him, there's purpose for their healing and his healing. At the end of the day, it's all part of the plan. It's all
Right.
unfolding, and you just got to trust the divine in that, and so I kind of surrendered in that sense, but
That he's on his own healing journey and he'll wake up when he's ready to heal up, like to wake up.
yeah. Yeah, if I don't know if that's even possible at this point.
Mm,
I think he's got very little conscientious awareness
mm,
around what he's doing, or how he's
mm,
hurting people. So
mm, hmm. Okay. So maybe some final thoughts on your process of womb healing. Like what do you want to give to the world now for in that context? How
mhm.
is it offering healing to women?
Yeah, so I think a big passion for me is helping women that have gone through similar, relationship distortions or manipulations, and healing the wounds that we hold within our womb space, the sexual abuse. A lot of the work that I do in my womb weaving circles is giving space for sisters to come and be seen, come and be heard, a space where they can be vulnerable. And as sisters, we've almost betrayed one another so often, for our loved ones or for the men in our life. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
about building new connections, ones that aren't based on betrayal or competition or jealousy or whatever it is, but just being humble and being, witnessed in our pain, in our journeys, and empowering through the magic that comes together in sisterhood. There is a beautiful gift of like almost doors unlocking, or we unlock places within us, and we each hold unique keys for each woman to unlock. And that's something that I've really loved experiencing and witnessing and holding space for in my circles, is
Mm-hmm.
each woman brings a piece that then unlocks a code or an you know journey of information that we can just dive deeper into and explore that. And
Hmm.
it's
I love
very
that. It
experiential.
unlocks that journey for them. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautifully put.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of it's, ancestral healing, looking at the wounds that we have with our mothers and our womb carriers, and looking at the distortions of relationships that we've manifested and created in our lives, and how to bridge, that into new healthy dynamics and relationships, and
Mm,
creating stronger boundaries and learning psychic protection, learning about our energies, learning about the different lower dimensions that exist in this world, and how to um, heal those patches or heal those holes within our auric field. And
well, what would be some of those things
space.
that one could do to protect themselves psychically? I know for one thing that I'm very sensitive. So these things, I've definitely had my own series of things I've had to work through on this theme as well in my life. So I was just curious, like what kind of recommendations would you make in terms of protecting ourselves from these kind of manipulative situations?
Mhm. I think the biggest piece is recognizing that nothing has power over you, that you are not a victim to
Mm,
your life's experiences. And when we can remember our power and claim our sovereign connection to our source
Mm.
within ourselves, within our hearts, in that place of heart connection, in that place of true love emanating outside of us, all of these lower or denser astral forces cannot get to us. But in order to truly embody that love, we have to heal everything that has brought us pain. And so doing the shadow work, doing the self work, looking at the places that are painful is essential, yet not, getting stuck in the pain, but consciously going into it and working through it. That's number one. Number two is simply just daily self-care practices, declaring your sovereign space. Whenever I feel that there's any energies that aren't mine that I'm, listening to in my mind, or I don't feel quite myself, I just say, whatever is not mine, leave now. Like, you are not welcome here. I am sovereign and no one is invited in my sovereign space. Declaring that, our words are so powerful. So daily declarations of sovereignty has also been very beneficial to just keep my energetic field clear.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
the words. Very powerful too.
Of
So
course.
I'm seeing the time fly by. It's just like, I mean, I would talk to you for hours. This is so interesting.
Yeah, it's been a great
Just like so
conversation.
much access into your experience, and like you're so clear. So it's just amazing to receive. Is there anything you'd like to finish with that you'd like the listeners to leave with as a takeaway?
Yeah, Julie, I'm just really grateful that you're paving the way forward with this platform. And I trust that everyone that's going to be going to this event to, really show up in presence. And part of something that I recognized when I would go to events, or I wasn't fully anchored in my sexuality, or there was some leaky energy, is I would constantly carry my life instead of from my lower centers and feeling kind of that sexual energy flow out into the room. I always wanted to connect from my heart. And so, if anything I can leave with is that we can stay connected to our heart space in these events, that instead of desiring to connect with our communities from these lower sexual centers, breathing that up and connecting in from the heart and letting that be the first place of contact. And I think from there, then, those everything that is not love will naturally come up in that space, and there's less distortion or weird sexual energy that can be brought into those containers. And so, yeah, I really bless your event, and I'm
Thank you so much.
excited to see how it unfolds. And, if anyone is going through an experience of, narcissistic manipulation, or any sort of relationship issues where they don't feel heard or loved, or they're being manipulated, or there's some sexual abuse or emotional, psychological abuse, I'm totally here to listen and receive you. It can be very challenging when you don't know who to go to, and
Who's a
so,
safe person to share this with?
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes only a flicker, like there's something wrong, but you're just scared of telling people you around you because they're like, I told you so, or whatever that energy that they're trying to avoid.
yeah.
They have a place that can go and have that conversation and be heard and seen and acknowledged for, or even give the mirror back to them, like, yeah, like what you experience is real.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
can make a huge difference for
exactly.
someone, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you know where to find me. And again, thank you so much, Julie.
Do you want to tell them how to find you on
Yeah, so
Facebook?
either through Facebook, Kelsea Shanaia Ray, I know you tagged me. I also have a website, www.returningtoinnocence.ca. You can find me there, or yeah, in the community of Vancouver here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for spending all this time with me this morning. It was very instructive and inspiring.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure. It's really good to connect with you, Julie. Thank you so much for your work and for paving the way for these topics to come forward.
Awesome. Big hug and love to you. You're amazing.
Love.
Inspiration. Bye-bye.
Bye.